started with 1 kilo, then 3, then 5, then 10, eventually to 30 kilos 3 times a week we were rolling with. And we would fly down with the money and drive back with the products. It's 18 hours straight through from LA to Seattle and then distribute. My name is Barton A. Madison, but I go by Bart with most people. I was born in Eastern Washington. We're now in Seattle, Washington, and
yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's great.
I don't know what else you're looking for.
Tell me a little bit about you growing up.
Okay.
What was it like? Were you with both of your parents? What town?
I was born in Colfax, Washington, Eastern Washington, the wheat country. Most of my family came out of the Palouse country, which is Colfax, that general area over there. I grew up with 2 younger sisters in Spokane for the early part of my life. And somewhere along the line, when I was about 5, my father left my mother, and she, trying to raise 3 children on her own, worked as a practical nurse and met a man that was a staff sergeant in the Air Force at Fairchild over there outside of Spokane.
Mm-hmm.
So she met and married him, and I'm just sure she thought that he was going to help her finance this program of raising these 3 kids and be the man of her dreams. But instead, he was a military guy, an alcoholic, and a card-carrying KKK member from North Florida. And so things became increasingly, he liked to bring the military home with him. And so the 3 children grew up under his regime, if you'll pardon the expression, and the violence and so on grew quickly. And for me, it was like he wasn't my real dad. And then there was all this violence and anger rhetoric going on all the time. So I blame myself because my mother was getting beat up and my 2 younger sisters for a lot of the problems that occurred. And my thing was to get out of there. And I had a lot of needs that I was trying to meet. And so I left home when I was 13 and the first time, and with no idea on the way the real world works.
So, yeah, I can identify with a lot of that. Did your mom stay married to him?
For a long time.
Yeah. And then, so he drank a lot in the home, so was there alcohol available? And did you ever use any of that to help you sort of escape your situation before you left home at 13?
That's funny. Of course.
Just curious.
Of course, but I really didn't develop a problem that I could see with it until teens.
Okay, like when you say teens, what do you mean?
Junior high school, teens. But by then, I was already away from there for the most part. I did return a couple of times, but it never got better. Mm-hmm. And I always felt like I was part of the problem because I was a rebellious little punk who wasn't going to play by this guy's rules, and I felt like I was part of the problem affecting my sisters or my mom and his anger and his violent stuff. So I just figured it was better if I went on my own, and even though I was ill-equipped to do such.
Yeah. So where did you go when you left?
All over.
Okay. So you didn't go live with like a family member or anything like that?
Oh, there were times where I went and lived with my real dad, who was... he lived in Pasco, Washington for 45 years, was a truck driver, I'm trying to think of the word, but he fooled around a lot, drank a lot himself, and was on the road a lot. So living there wasn't like any kind of family structure or any of that. I felt like I had less than for so long because, it didn't look like Donna Reed or Father Knows Best in my family. And so I had lots of reasons and justification for going out and living what the wildlife looked attractive to me, and home didn't look good. So I was trying to get in where I fit in out there in the mix. And so crime became a way of life early because I couldn't work, because I didn't have the skills, the knowledge to do that if I was motivated enough at that moment in view of what a victim I had become.
So, crime, when did you start committing crimes? What kind of crimes were you committing, and what were you paying with your crimes?
Probably the earliest crimes would be shoplifting. Just getting a candy bar sometimes was good. I'll share with you, I don't know where this is going to go, but there was a time, I moved around a lot, as I said. So I lived with my dad in Pasco sometimes, but he was married to a young woman, 19, so we couldn't get along very long. Mm-hmm. Then I got in trouble there, and that was, let me put a time frame on it. It was about junior high school, 1963, somewhere in there. They had a thing called counter checks in the grocery stores. So you would go in, and if you left your checkbook at home or you didn't have any cash, you just write a check, and they were a checkbook chained to the grocery store counter, and you would just write out a check. And so some of my little palsy-wowsies in junior high figured out that we could fill one of these checks out. All we had to do was steal the checkbook, and we could fill the checks out and cash them as if they were from our mom or dad, and it would work at the small town grocery stores there. And so that's what we did. So that would finance us playing pool, buying donuts, and even beer or wine or whatever on a weekend, Friday night or whatever. And so that became a thing for a while for us. So that was one of the early beginnings of my crime. And eventually, FDIC banks are federally insured. So eventually somebody from the feds came and knocked on my father's door and said that they wanted to find me and my dad. I came home from school one day and he said, I think it's time you go live with your mom for a while. And so I had to move. And that's when I moved down to Georgia, which meant I was back in the environment with the stepfather, my two sisters and mom, and that whole situation again. So I moved to Georgia at about 63 or 4. By 64, I was in prison for the first time, Alto, Georgia. I got busted in Perry, Georgia, and the crimes there were what would be called in Washington State car prowling. Down there, it was larceny from an auto was the name of the offense. And I had been warned when I first came to town. Somebody there already knew about me in the system because it was a very small town, Perry, Georgia. The probation officer called my mom and asked her to bring me down and talk to him. And he told me, he said, boy, he said, if you come down here in my town and do what you were doing up there, I will have your ass in prison. And he did a lot.
He wasn't playing. He wasn't playing with you.
So when I was 16, I went to prison for the first time, 1964.
Adult prison or juvenile prison? Adult.
Adult prison.
And so let me ask you this. What did you learn in prison?
What did I learn?
I feel like you learned some stuff in there.
Well, I got my first tattoo there. I learned about tattoos and prison tattoos. No, it was a pretty tough prison.
Yeah.
First of all, the state in Georgia has a work program for you, whoever you are, and everything in the small town of Perry and in the prison system at that time was segregated. It was a whole different world in that way. So it was rare that I saw a person of color. It was often every day that we went out to work at something. And sometimes it was digging a ditch and filling it in. Sometimes it was picking peaches. Sometimes it was peeling peaches. And then it was at lunchtime, it was eating peach cobbler when you went in to eat your dinner or whatever. But it was a pretty violent place. It was like in the movies. There was, everybody had a weapon. There was lots of sexual stuff going on and all of that. Anyway, I got a 3 one-year sentences ran concurrently. So I did 1 year there and got out. And that began a for me, which was a regular thing of, it'll be, I know I got it now. I know what I got to do. And so my idea.
And what was that? Just out of
that
curiosity.
was to move, get out of Georgia. I had a down south problem.
Okay.
I didn't have a Bart problem.
Right. Well, and so let me just ask you this, because that prison was violent and you were a 16-year-old boy. Did anybody take you under their wing in a way that helped you stay safe?
I had a friend that was a Golden Gloves boxer, and he worked with me in the beginning, fortunately.
Yeah.
And he said, you don't want to be a punk. He said, if anybody steps in front of you in the main line, the Chow Hall line, or, does anything offensive or hits you or offers you gifts or any of that, you don't want to do that. He said, if you become a punk, you'll be a punk. You'll wear that jacket for a long time. So I got that picture.
Yes.
Snitching and punking ain't two things I was early schooled on.
Yeah.
Right. So that was embedded in me from the moment. Yeah. And I saw what happened to other people that I saw that develop before my eyes. There were always bullies. There were always the guy that ran the system. The guards were merely babysitters for a bunch of madness.
Yeah.
Really.
And so did you learn any new skills, what you were going to do not in Georgia after you got out that helped you be a better criminal and a better drug dealer?
Not really, although I did go to school. You had to go to school and work if you didn't have a diploma yet. So I was in high school when I got busted in Perry, Georgia, and then I went and got enough to get a GED there.
Yeah.
That's only educational stuff I got on that trip to prison. Yeah. I got out of there, went down to South Florida, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and apparently I didn't learn anything about skills or any of that. I couldn't go to work. I didn't ever work down there, I don't think, before I went back to prison again. And ended up breaking into, I had a homie, a partner from Chicago or Rockford, Illinois down there. And together, he was sort of on the lam from the service. And so we partnered up and broke into an Elks Club and stole all the liquor and tobacco products and cash that we could. Got away with that one. And sometime later, his girlfriend was a nurse at a local hospital. And in taking her to work, he spotted a medical building. So that was our next hit. So one night we're robbing the medical building of all the, we got a lot of Ritalin, some IDs, some cash, and so on. And alarm went off and we both got caught, and he told them about our plan and everything. And so he got a little less time. I don't really call it snitching, but he cooperated in a way that we both went to prison, him for less. And I got 2 years on that deal. That was 1968.
And that was in
second
Florida.
Trip to prison, Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Those prisons are bad.
Well, Georgia was
worse.
My experience was pretty much the worst. I would not recommend it to anybody. Florida wasn't good either.
Yeah.
And so I'm in Broward County Jail. That was one of my cellmates was Murph the Served, jewel thief. Okay. You can Google that. Okay. And Jack Roland Murphy. And he was also, he became sort of a role model for me, even though he was in there for a double murder.
Yeah.
And he was famous. They made a movie about him. He robbed a Star of India sapphire from a museum in New York. And
that's impressive.
Well, yeah, it was really impressive TV style, especially for a young punk that's trying to be a G.
Yeah.
And he looked like the real deal. When they brought him into Broward County Jail, he got some things. He's got these silk shorts, and he's got the newspapers, out-of-town newspapers coming in there. Mr. Murphy, here's your papers. So he looked like a real G to me. And I was infatuated by then with the idea of crime, being a mob guy or whatever. And he was not only was he connected with the mafia, but he was also in the papers, cool,
yeah,
into cocaine, which I wasn't really into yet, but that was part of what told me
What were
it
you
was
into
cool.
at that time?
Just alcohol and pot.
Okay.
Probably a little pot. But pot never, I didn't smoke marijuana for very long because I found myself being lethargic and I thought I ought to be doing more. Was never happy with my situation. I just didn't know how to navigate making it better.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. How many times throughout your lifetime, Bart, have you been to prison?
So Georgia, Florida.
And how many states?
Okay, so Florida, Georgia, prison, you're saying.
Yeah.
When I got out of the South, I came back to Washington in 1971. I got a delivery and got a 2 number, which dates me in this state, in 1971. I didn't go to prison. Back then they had a thing, this Washington State Legislature had a law that allowed for deferred felony sentencing. I made a delivery of a Schedule II narcotic, to wit, Seconal or barbiturates, to an undercover agent, got busted, and so I got a deferred felony sentence on that. So 3 years of supervision. If I get off, it gets vacated. That's what happened somehow. Not that I was in compliance, but somehow that's the way it worked out. So that was not a prison trip. Next trip to prison would have been probably 82. In 1976, I met a guy in Franklin County Jail. I was in work release over there, and I met a guy who offered me a job in Seattle. That's when I first came to Seattle. Was 75. I'm away from your original question about prisons, but
That's okay. You'll get there.
Yeah.
This is all good.
He offers me a job. The lady that runs the work release program is friends with my dad. He lived in Pasco for 45 years, a Teamster and all that stuff. So he was kind of connected, had juice in that town. And she let me go early from work release. I had a year to do there and to take this great job in Seattle. So I came to Seattle in 1975, and I worked for Career Training College. It was at Westlake and Mercer as a counselor for people who were on DVR roles. Okay. DVR is Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. These were people who had been getting a check from the system for some time, but hadn't successfully become employed. DVR would finance your schooling, education, would do a lot of things to help the underemployed excel or come up, as it were. But the social programs at that time, welfare, DSHS, at that time was not viewed favorably by the general public, I don't think. There were misconceptions about what they do, or misperceptions. And it was perceived that we were just giving away a lot of money to these people who were laying around not doing anything with it. So the school that I worked for, the guy that got me the job there had a proposal that they put before the government, said, we'll get these people hired. We'll do a crash employment program. The school itself was about 75 girls, mostly women, who were there. It was like Griffin or ITT. It was a business college. But there was a separate entity where they got this proposal through the CEOs of the school, Trend Systems it was, out of Vancouver, that they would retrain these DVR clients. To qualify for DVR, I did at one time, you could be an ex-felon, or you could be somewhat handicapped, a speech impediment, anything, ADHD, ADD, and all that hadn't come along yet. People weren't being diagnosed for that, although there were people that were in there with those issues, I'm sure. But anyway, I did a crash employment program and a job orientation program through the school, but it was for the government. At some point in time, the guy who got me the job, he was in jail when I met him, got in a little trouble with money, gambling, drinking, all that sort of thing. He would take me out of work. We'd go to the Long Acres, to the horse track. We'd go play Texas Hold'em. Then he'd want to go to the strip club. So he was kind of a Texas blowhard type. And so that didn't work out well for him in the end. And then eventually I found that job. It was my first really straight, square job where I felt like I was actually doing something good. But that was not my style. So I got a job at a big rock and roll club in North Seattle called the Aquarius. Went to work there as a doorman at night. And there was fun. There were girls, there was cocaine, there was alcohol. And
is that when your relationship with cocaine started?
75. No. That began in 67.
Oh.
But it certainly increased. There was a good run right in there. And to finance that, because when there's substance, you always got to find a way to finance the roadshow, ways and means to get more.
Yeah.
And so I was getting all these government checks for these DVR clients about the same time as he got in trouble with them for something. And I wrote my name on them, cashed them, and so on, knowing that the shoe's going to drop at some point in time. And then when I felt like it was imminent, and the sense of impending doom had increased to a great level, I decided it was time to move again. I got very good at moving for a long time. And so I went down to Portland. Well, first I went to Canada and found out that isn't a good place to go on the run. And then I came back to Seattle for
They let you in, though?
I did get in.
Oh, interesting.
Vancouver, BC. And then I went to Portland after I stayed back in Seattle for a while. Got up a little money, got a vehicle, got down to Portland, fell into a bar down there, a situation where I could work in the bar and play blackjack all day and get a little come up. I could hold my own. I mean, gambling.
And you have money for the end of the night.
Gambling is like substance.
Yeah.
And there was some drinks and food there. And I hooked up with the guy that was running the bar, and we became roommates, and the boss became my employer for about 10 years. I worked for him.
There
In the bar business, not just there. He was a ex-ball player for the Baltimore Orioles that got shot down in the minors, and he managed a baseball team, a AAA team in Portland, and decided he was getting older and going into the bar business. So he opened up a New York-style sports bar in Portland. It was very successful. There was one here in Seattle at Third and Cherry. If you look at it now, you would never believe it, but it was a busy sports bar. In about 1983, it got shut down.
What bar was that?
Peters In and Peters Out.
Okay.
Frank Peters was his name.
Okay.
Frank Peters was his name. The Peters Out was the takeout window on the side on Cherry Street.
Okay.
But it was a booming bar at one time, and Swanee's and the Comedy Underground was a couple of guys that worked for him that went down and opened up their own bar when he was in a rage one day. Okay. So I worked in that element for a long time. Now we're getting into the early 80s.
Did you end up going to prison in Oregon?
Yes, but that was later. I didn't go to prison in Oregon then. I went down to Oregon and worked for a living in the bar business, and the bar business and the coke business kind of
hand in hand
went together real well for a long time. And then I came back to Washington. Mount St. Helens blew in 1980. When that happened, I couldn't breathe very well, so that was time to move also. So I went down to the Bay Area, lived there. I've lived there 3 times. And I lived there and worked at a bar in San Francisco and eventually came back to Seattle. Okay. And the guy in Portland had the bar up here going then at Third and Cherry. So I came back up here, and traffic accident or incident or something happened, and I got caught up on the old checks.
Oh.
So now they gave me an option when I went to court. I had been on the run for a theft too, this charge was. And it was about $4,700 worth of government checks that I had written my name on, knew I was going to get busted and left out on. So when I came back, they arrested me on that. And when I went before the court said, well, it seems like you've got a substance problem here. You can here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you 5 years in prison, or you can go to treatment. That was actually my first time to treatment. I chose the treatment. And at that time they had, Cedrinar had been going for a while. It's a Synanon-based attack and counter group therapy treatment.
Behavior modification.
Yes, thank you. And so connected with Cedrinar was another one called Conquest Center, and that's where I ended up going. in my mind, I thought I would do a little 30 to 90 day spin dry and be back on the streets again and doing my thing. And I ended up being in there for about 13 months. And it was a pretty good experience. I didn't like it all, but there were some good things I got out of that. And got out of there, but it had nothing to do with me recovering from the disease of addiction that I suffered from, which I was the only one who didn't know that. So I went back to crime. I think I went to work at somewhere, I don't recall exactly where when I got out of there, but I think back in the bar business. And eventually, in that bar at 3rd and Cherry, there was a guy came in one night, late night. We had a lot of after hours, and the guy offered me a deal I couldn't refuse. Cocaine was getting very popular in those years. It was the early 80s. And he said, I want to make $1 million this year, and I think you can help me. I always had connections from the time in Miami forward. And he said, and I was shooting cocaine at that time every day, living in the bar. Like the boss said, if you want to work the bar business, you got to do it like Humphrey Bogart and Casablanca. You got to live it. And he had bedrooms and things in every bar that he built so you could do that, a bedroom and an office. He wanted his managers to live there on site, so I did. This guy that I met after hours formed what we called Amigo Bank 1 and later Amigo Bank 2. And what he really needed from me was a connection. What he really wanted to do was build a cocaine business. And so we started going to LA shortly after and started with 1 kilo, then 3, then 5, then 10, eventually to 30 kilos 3 times a week we were rolling with. And we would fly down with the money and drive back with the products. It's 18 hours straight through from LA to Seattle and then distribute. By 1986, I had bought all the toys that a young punk thinks will fill the holes in his soul. And I was the unhappiest guy on the planet, probably. I was so suffering from psychosis, I'm sure. And so I would lose or think somebody stole the money or the dope. I had a home I was buying over in Ballard, brick Tudor home, beautiful home, and a girlfriend and a bunch of people around me that I didn't trust. Nobody. I couldn't trust your smile or anything because I thought everybody was after my money or my dope. And I had all this stuff. I bought all the toys, the cars, the clothes, the girls, the rock and roll fantasy, and was the unhappiest guy on the planet, but didn't know how to change it. But that problem was solved for me because by 88, that same guy that said he wanted to make $1 million this year got busted by the feds coming into Tacoma with 8 kilos and so on. And so they took his money, took his dope, took his money and threw him back his car keys and said, go home. We know where you live. We'll be by to see you. We know you won't leave because your whole family's been involved in this thing and so on and so on. And so we went from being called an Amigo Bank to a conspiracy to interstate distribution of cocaine, and it went on from there. 19 fell on the first indictment, 10 on the second superseding indictment, where that same guy owed money to the connection that I got him in L.A., had him fly up here. It was like on TV. He sends the burro to the locker to get the cash, and the feds swoop in and get them. And they interviewed him for 8 months at his house in Fremont. And through that process, they watched the Super Bowl with him, drank beer with him, and debriefed him. And they had already wiretapped him for over and over. So the indictment that came out after they took him before a grand jury had 41 counts on it. The overwhelming count was a conspiracy to interstate distribution of cocaine, but there were 41 counts included one called illegal use of a federal communications device, to wit, a cell phone. And so for every one of those, I'm pretty sure what they were doing were wiretaps and listening in on conversations. He kept the same phone the whole time. And so that was my next trip to prison.
So was that to the feds?
Yes.
Okay.
And that was in Oregon, and that was Sheridan. Sheridan had just been opened. It was a brand new prison. It looked like a Ramada Inn off the coastal highway. And George Bush was the president at the time, and he was going, read my lips. And Ollie North hadn't happened just quite yet. And so when I went to Sheridan, it was I got busted on Friday the 13th, July of 1989. That was my next trip. And I did about 4 years. I think I had 5 and did 4 on it. You only get 54 days a year, good time in the feds. And so, but I wasn't the only one. This was a 41 count indictment with 19 names on it. And all of us went to prison except for the guy who was going to make $1 million this year, who ended up cooperating big time to get a lesser sentence and to protect his family. He was an ex-Mormon, and he was the patriarch of his family. And his brother made the trips with us. His daughters were involved in their boyfriends were using it, and it was a big network that the feds wanted to take out. That's what they do, and they're very good at what they do. And so and we had Amigo Bank too, which was a bunch of Greeks that had restaurants that also got involved in the thing on.
Were they in the indictment?
It was about a 6-year run. Yeah, yeah, they were. And Greece doesn't have a treaty with the U.S., so the major guy on the Greek side got out of town when he saw what was coming down and never had to suffer any consequences. Some of his lower echelon guys walked the yard with me at Sheridan. Yeah. But, and then the guy who rolled, I don't want to use the term rolled over, the guy who cooperated was found in a hot tub. He was overweight, obese, and had a cocaine problem, and was found in a hot tub dead. After he was freebasing and taking a hot tub with 2 girls, and they found him there.
Yeah.
Dead. He's in Washelli. We all heard about it and thought he was on the witness protection program or something. When we were down.
Find out he's just up right up on Aurora, hanging out in the graveyard.
Yeah. He's in the graveyard. So that's kind of how that went. And so that was...
How many other trips?
But so 64, 68, 89 that was, and got out of there in about 93 on intensive supervision for 3 years. Mm-hmm. And then the next...
How did you...
Next
time... Because I know you're notorious for not doing your probation.
Right.
So how did you skip out of
I don't know if notorious is the correct word. It's a problem that I had, though.
Little problem. The feds don't really let you not do your probation. So how did that work out?
They told me, in fact, when I first got there, they said, we know you like this stuff. You've been doing it a long time, but know this. Every time that you come up dirty, and they gave me some slips to go get signed at meetings. So that was when I got involved with Narcotics Anonymous.
Okay.
Yes. And they said the intensive supervision meant that I had to go down. At that time, the Fed's probation department, U.S. probation office, was the 41st floor at Columbia Center Tower. So I would have to go down there 3 times a week to give them UAs and show my slips and so on. They said, know this, every time that you fail to comply, something is going to happen from our office. And they told me that right up front. And something did, but they weren't brutal with it. I had to go into clean and sober living on the first, or sometime around the first failure. Mm-hmm. And I got a job right away. After I got in the first Oxford house, I went to and got a job in the car business. I grew up in the car business. And it so happened that it fit real well with my lifestyle. Yeah. And there's a lot of cocaine and alcohol and gambling and all that in there. So the two went kind of well for a while together. But
and so how long did you stay clean during that 3-year period?
Oh, clean?
Yeah, like were you not using?
No. I'm using and dealing the whole time, even though I'm making a pretty good paycheck on the job.
Yeah.
Somewhat functional
addict.
So
it's more lifestyle.
Yeah.
Drive than, okay.
Yeah. I got married around that same time. I met a woman. I have by now, after getting out of federal prison, I have by now an inkling that maybe there's a different, better way to live. And so the girl that I meet later and get married to is in the back of a crack house, but she just got out of the Army, and to me, she's probably got discipline and
she's your ticket out.
and so what she's actually did, she lived on Crack Alley over there off of Lake City Way, and she's renting out a portion of her house for crack to one of my partners. So I don't know my thinking. I can't explain my thinking sometimes. But it wasn't a good decision, I'll put it that way. So we ended up getting married, this girl and I, and we had a beautiful daughter later. But with her addiction and my addiction, it could not work. And in spite of the fact I making really good money at work and dealing on the side, somehow it just couldn't all ever get together in a way that was designed for healthy living or success. I don't know. Anyways, the marriage failed after about 2 years. So around that time, I met Rachel, the mother of my son, and I told you about that, the connection. And so next trip to prison was 1997. Rachel and I are living together and dealing and using, and I got busted a number of times. I could never do the supervision, and so I would. The federal case, the supervision there, I successfully got through the 3 years somehow. Right at the end, I got a dirty, and Maximum Jack Tanner was my judge down in Tacoma from the Exxon case, and he, for some reason, decided to give me a break and not send me back to prison. I had done some good things over a period of time in their eyes, I guess. And so I was off paper. And my mind said it's the time to do it, but do it differently. So I decided to be a mid-level, not in the big time anymore, dealer. And I always had connections. And there were always people wanting it. So I went back into that business, and by 97, and also I had my own disease that I was trying to feed, and a woman with me who also did. And so I don't understand now how I could think the way I did, but I do. And so I kept doing the business, being involved, not one step in, both feet in the drug game. And in 97, I got busted in 96 for possession with intent to deliver. And this time, all those points the prosecutor threw at the case, points meaning offender score, criminal history on the grid or the sentencing guidelines. So I went to McNeil Island on that one with 100 months. And I took
that's when McNeil was a state prison, right? It was after they...
It was before they turned it into a sex offender special commitments prison.
Yeah, that's actually
that
outside.
happened while I was in there. In fact, that was 98 when they...
Right, when they cleaned out the prison and then they opened up the civil commitment sector.
Right, they had what they called the annex. In fact, I went there for a short time.
The annex is where they used to do the boot camp.
Yes. They did a boot camp for a while.
Yeah, my first husband did most of the time
over there. Yeah. It's a beautiful place to be, McNeil Island. There are lots of deer and eagles and things over there, but it's not a great place to do time. It was an old, rundown federal prison that the feds leased to the state, I think in 81. And so I'm there with 100 months. This is, I don't know how many times now I've been to prison, and I'm thinking, man, that's a lot of time. 100 months is 8.25 years, and I'm walking around the yard, and I'm listening to the other guys talk about their case, and I know the rapo, the chimo, all those words are coming out, and these guys are doing less time than me, and all I had was a little dope. It was actually more than a little, all right? But I'm thinking there must be a way out of this. So for once, now the prison mentality, it was always part of my time from the very beginning when that guy that took me under his wing and said, you never want to be a punk or a snitch and all that. That was part of that prison mentality that goes with being in the joint was part of my problem along the way, coupled with substance and all the dealing mentality and using mentality. It was a double whammy kind of, I think. Anyways, where was I going with that? When I got to McNeil Island, I didn't go to the weight pile and pump iron with the fellas. I was trying to figure out a way out of this dilemma. It sounded like a long time. 90 days can seem like a long time, but 100 months? That was like a really long time. Christmases go by very slowly in prison. And so I started going to the law library. I got signed up for school again. I failed to mention when I was in federal prison, they had a good college program there. So I got a lot of good courses in there. I got probably 90 or 100 credits by now in college classes, junior college at Pierce College at McNeil, Chemeketa in Oregon. So I'm building up some courses, and I'm also becoming a little more aware of some of the things in the law. The game that I've been playing, I didn't really understand all the rules too well. And so I started going to the law library, and I went there every day. And I hooked up with an old friend of mine from Walla Walla who was one of the best jailhouse lawyers I ever met. And he kept encouraging me. He said, "You've got something here." And so I would go to the law library every day, and I was taking an IT class. I got an IT certificate while I was at McNeil, and some other classes. But the thing I'm really proud of was that I found the way to reduce my sentence. I went in there in 97. My release date was originally 2002. I worked for a year and a half creating a motion for relief of judgment and sentence, and based on an RCW. Under a collateral attack, I had copped a plea or pleaded guilty to get 100 months because I didn't have a case, quite frankly. And so I took the plea and then realized that what I pleaded to, there's a thing called a collateral attack. It's not an appeal, but it's an attack you can make on your sentencing issues. And I found that I had been sentenced based on an erroneous offender score or criminal history computation, which the prosecutors almost always do. And so I had to get copies of my police history, my criminal history with both the state and the feds to create documentation to make my litigation valid, and which I did over time. It took about a year and a half. I wrote the sentencing judge a letter. I said, "Begging your pardon, sir, you didn't do everything you were supposed to do at sentencing according to the law. Plain language of the law cannot be denied." And so I laid all that out and wrote my own motion for relief and won. Eventually I got taken back to court, got my sentence reduced by half from 100 months to 46. And by that year and a half time had passed with good time and everything, I was nearing the gate already, more or less. So at the time the annex was still open. That's when I came back from court. That's when I went there to camp, they called it, for a short time before going to work release, after going to the hole because I came back and couldn't give them a UA. I couldn't produce. And so that's the same in DOC as a dirty. So I went to the hole for 90 days. They threatened me with shipping me out to closed custody and eventually let me out, put me in the camp, and then I was released to work release, went to Reynolds. And so that was far from the last time to prison. That was kind of in the middle of my my prison history. And I would get out of there, and I would get out and get community custody in the state is what they called it. And I would have to go report to a PO, and it happened over and over again for many years there to follow. And I would be violated and on the run because I wasn't going to go down dirty and give a dirty UA. Well, that would be stupid.
Wait, like a sitting duck?
Yeah, so be like turning myself in. Are you kidding me? So I would be on the lam, changing addresses, license plates, vehicles, locations, and committing more crime again. And now the high times at Ridgemont High have ended.
It's not a party anymore?
It's not kilos anymore. It's an 8-ball or an ounce, and it's boosting. And I'm down to boosting for a living, and I'm living in motels and hotels, and just down to bottom feeder life, so to speak. Living in my van sometimes, and all that kind of thing. Stealing every day for a living. Being a counter.
So you could support your drug habit.
And live, and food and rent and those things. And it's not cheap to live in motels. You may have heard the motel lifestyle. It was so, even a blind guy could see, even a person like me could see that this is not. You can't pay that kind of rent on your kind of budget and have it come out well in the end. But my priority system from the very moment I began using substance, especially my drug of choice, changed. And I have one priority, and it even superseded my children, and that is my next hit. And I've got a lot of needs and wants and all that that I'm trying to meet. And so I would be out there. They're really... it's fortunate in my case that somebody didn't get hurt along the way more than they did, and that somebody could have been me, but it could have also been other people, and probably was in some occasions. So without saying anything real incriminating, it was a nasty lifestyle that I'm glad I don't live anymore.
How many of the people that you used with over the years, and based on the fact that you were all over the place, how many other people funded their addiction in the same and similar fashion?
That I would come in contact with? Hard to put a number on that.
Okay, let's give a speculative percentage.
Well,
in some form or
like-minded
fashion.
individuals attract each other, I think, in many cases. Yeah. And our, meaning people who are involved in drugs and crime, especially, are always looking for reciprocal relationships, I think. And how can I help you to help me, or vice versa? How can you help me to elevate, to get this vision of whatever my perception of what I'm trying to accomplish at the time, which usually was pretty selfish in retrospect.
So about 100% participated.
Well, 100's a big number.
It is a big number, but that's what I'm trying to get a percentage here of what this, based on the people that you interacted with in some form or fashion. Maybe not everybody's at the same level or doing the same thing.
I was pretty self-centered. I've done a little 12-step work.
Yeah.
And so somewhere down the line, I think I realized that I was pretty self-centered.
Yeah.
And I was just looking. I wasn't really looking, but I would gravitate towards whatever was going to further my...
So the people that you interacted with were doing the same kind of stuff, bottom line.
A lot of them, yeah. Not 100 maybe, but no, because 100 wouldn't be, that couldn't work out either.
Right.
I had to have some people that were squares along the way to help too. I had, I worked at jobs and did things along the way that were not totally dishonest. And so I wasn't always with people like me.
Was that your last trip to prison?
McNeil? Mm-hmm. No, I went back many times over.
After that?
Yes. It became a sort of a repeated routine. I would get out.
Was it a respite? Would you consider it a respite?
In retrospect, perhaps.
But it was a chink in your chain. It was happening.
It's not a big learning experience, except the cumulative value.
Yeah, that's not the question. Isn't about it being a learning experience. I'm just wondering. I know I can speak to my own experience. That I absolutely hated it. I never wanted to be stopped. However, it did provide me time and space.
It gave my body and brain a break for a while. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. But I kept going back. Okay. Because I would get out with the best of intentions. The road to hell is paved with them.
But let me ask you. Okay, I'm going to interrupt you there. So when you say, okay, you had the best of intentions, what does that? I've seen the light. What does that mean? So when you get locked up, what is that? What does that mean? The best of intentions.
It's not when I get locked up. It's when I'm getting out.
Oh, is it? So you don't have a process before getting out where you're like, man, I want to do this differently. Like, okay, I can probably stop having this happen by doing this. So there's no kind of reflection during the time?
Sure. And especially 97 was when my son was born on that trip.
Yeah.
My daughter was already there running around with my wife somewhere who's still using.
Yeah.
And so I contemplated on that trip while looking at the ceiling from a cement mattress. I was thinking, I'm a stand-up convict, but I'm sure a piss-poor parent.
Yeah.
And something needs to change. On the East Coast, they told me, you got to, if you're not true to your own blood, what are you true to? Later, my sponsor told me, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And it occurred to me that while I was, and also somewhere along the way in prison, I did a little MRT, moral recognition therapy class, part of a chemical dependency course of study that they offer in there. And at one point in that book that they give you for that class, it has a picture of a gravestone, headstone, and it says, how do you want to be remembered? And so it occurred to me that, how would I be remembered? Would I be Big Pimpin', a big G, or do I want to be a parent? And so it began to bother me. In other words, I developed this thing, maybe a tinge of a thing called a conscience began to develop, but that didn't really happen full force until I got more involved in Narcotics Anonymous. And even that didn't help until I overdosed. I had a major overdose for a change.
So how many times had you been to prison before you overdosed? And then I'm going to talk about that overdose a little bit.
Well, let's count. Say Georgia, Florida, Oregon, Washington, many times.
How many times is many times? Over 5. You've been to prison well over 5 times.
Oh, yeah.
8 times. Maybe
probably. More. I was just working on my LFO refunds.
Yeah.
So there are 5 cases there that I'm getting refunds
Here in Washington State.
Here in Washington.
Okay, so we're looking at probably 9 times on separate new cases.
I believe that my points on the McNeil Island thing and the thing that I argued on my litigation was for 8 points. 8 points and a seriousness level of 8 for possession with intent to deliver or delivery on the other side of the grid.
Okay. Well, and just so that people that do watch this know, just because it's 8 points doesn't mean it's 8 trips, but they accumulate and then they dictate the length of sentence depending on how much space and time has been in between those convictions. And so...
and also what they're for.
Right. Depending on the type of crime and the seriousness of the crime, how close they are together will depend on how many those can multiply and then, of course, increase a potential sentence under the SRA guidelines.
And if you throw a weapon in or...
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other deal because that's going to give you a block of...
I guess the judge, the ability to accelerate, or accelerate's not the word, enhance your sentence.
Right, enhance your sentence with no good time allowable, depending on the kind of
enhancement. And or the feds could get interested in you.
Right. Well, and I've had that happen with some friends of mine who did the state time on some crimes. And then they get out and they're in work release, and then the feds come and pick them up for
that thing that happened way back when you were on that last run.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's talk about that. So have you ever, well, first of all, if we have an idea about your years of active addiction, even with what we would consider minimal was weed and alcohol in the beginning, how long were you in an intimate relationship with chemicals? Chemicals that changed the way that you felt, that you gave sold your soul for. It is a serious question.
Well,
I'm always serious.
My relationship with substance began, I'm thinking, back pre-teens with the alcohol that was in the household and the alcohol that looked like a way to change the way I felt back in grade school or junior high.
And just as a disclaimer, you're clean and sober now?
For a little over 10 years.
Okay. And how old are you, if you'll throw yourself on?
75 yesterday.
Okay. So you had a relationship with drugs at least as long as I've been alive, which is 51 years. At least, if not a little.
I would shoot up every day. Cocaine was my drug of choice, and I would shoot it up every day. In retrospect, I can't believe that my body took it.
Look, I'm impressed the fact that you're sitting here as healthy and as active and as driven as you are.
I've been very, very lucky or blessed, whatever.
So I would argue that there's a job for you to do that you're doing. And so, because my dad was the same age as you, and he died in 2017 and lived a similar but not as immersed lifestyle. Well, he didn't go back to prison, which I think is one of the things that was a precursor to his untimely death, in my opinion, because he didn't have those respites. And so he just continued to indulge in a relationship with, whether it be just alcohol, but definitely cocaine as well.
Prison might have been a life-saving thing in more ways than one.
Oh, yeah.
It was definitely, it was not fun. I didn't enjoy it, although I envisioned myself as I can do my time, all that sort of.
A little bit of ego, a little bit of street cred, a little bit of prison cred.
Yeah. But the real deal was I didn't enjoy it at all. I hated it, and so how much of a deterrent was it really? I don't know. But
I would argue that they're usually not a deterrent, but they do sometimes help to create some preservation.
That, along with all the other desperate situations I got into, the overdose, the living in your vans.
Let's talk about that.
Being broke, busted, and disgusted, toe up and the flow up, trying to come up, hit a lick and re-up. All that stuff cumulative is what got to be enough.
And let me ask you this too, because what I've been listening to is a progression of sort of a decline in your status. It sounds like the younger you were, the more plentiful and I don't know, immersed in this stuff. But it sounds like the longer you stayed in that relationship with drugs, the more you had to work for them.
Yeah. I think that's true of everybody, but no, it wasn't more plentiful then.
Okay.
It was more attractive then. It got to be less plentiful as time went on, as did my
finances. And that's what I'm saying, I'm saying. So it sounds like there was more happening, and so what?
I was totally infatuated with this what looked glossy, sexy, cool, hip thing. I'm a child of the '60s, so. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It looked cool. Yeah. I moved to New York, to the Village from Miami, because it was cool to be there.
Right.
And it wasn't cool when I got there.
On your street resume.
and then I moved to the Bay Area. They said, wear flowers in your hair. I went out there, and it wasn't that. But the media, things I heard in the media, things I heard from the peers that I chose to hang with, and so on, influenced the perceptions that I was operating off of, and my perceptions, in retrospect, were a little askew, yes, as were my attitudes.
So you overdosed. What did you overdose on? When did you overdose?
I overdosed many times, but usually they were brief overdoses. People would bring me back up a heroin or whatever combination.
Let's talk about the one that changed your life.
The one that changed my life was, what happened was I got some money. I always thought money would make better. My life would be better if I just had more money. Well, I got in a car wreck. Had been in many, but I had a car wreck in 2000 something, and went to the lawyers and doctors that I was directed to do to get the big check, right? And so I got a check, I don't remember the amount, but it was substantial. But I was working, but I came home one day and there's this big check. And I had been involved in recovery or 12-step meetings, again, since 2010. The last time I went to prison was 2010. I went to Airway Heights. I got out and I worked, and I got, I went back to the car dealership, and I got in a wreck that wasn't my fault, and I got a big check. And my brain said, it's time to say, we got to celebrate. I had been clean.
Oh, we need it.
Had been clean for 3 years at that point. Okay. I was working with my sponsor, going to meetings, but really not doing any step work or really doing any real introspection other than just neck talk at meetings. I'm not really involved in service. I'm not doing any of those things.
Well, what made you get clean for that 3 years? Like, what was the defining moment that made you get clean?
That's a good question, but It's a real good question, but probably the fact that maybe prison was beginning to work, or
So was
those
it a
other
result
things.
of prison that you got clean the first time?
I don't want to give that much credit to prison. It was the
Well, it's-
cumulative effect of
So
all
when-
those things.
Right. So when I say that, that's not to say, oh, prison helped me get into recovery.
No, I
That's not
understand.
what I'm saying. Like,
I understand.
prison does create a respite sometimes and a fertile ground for us to make choices to benefit our lives. And so is that when you got clean, when you were locked up?
I was going to meetings when I was locked up. I wouldn't say, well, I definitely got clean. It was that respite,
Yeah.
but only for short periods of time, because by now what's happening is I'm getting busted for violations.
Yeah.
And when I'd get busted for a violation, I was also using, obviously, I can't show up for the UA. So it was so ridiculous and redundant at one point that the same cop in Shoreline arrested me 3 times in 1 year. And on the last time, he didn't even ask me where the dope was. He went up under the radio in the van and got it out from behind there. It was probably just an 8-ball or a quarter ounce or something of coke. But he didn't even have to ask me to shake down or where's the dope or any of that. He already knew. And that's how bad it was getting. And so I would just get high the first day out of whenever I would go in. And back then you could go get on a violation for a short time, very short time. You might just go to jail and get out in 60 days or whatever, or go back to prison for 60 days and get out. But I would always get violated, then get a new beep, and I would travel a lot from King to Snohomish and back again because both counties operated differently, had customers in both for the dirty business, so I could go back and forth. And I would usually end up violated with a new beep for possession or with intent, and go back to court go to court in King, get sentenced and go to Shelton, wait to get classified, and before the 6 or 8 weeks it takes to get classified at Shelton, be brought back to Snohomish for the one up there. I would have dual cases and then have to do time on the violation and whatever.
And then the new charge, which actually increased your...
Right,
your
because that's
sentencing
more
range.
points.
Right, because you were on placement. So you get out, you decide to get clean, and then you got some money, which can be a trigger.
On the
if we
car
don't
wreck.
know.
And that's
Right.
when I went out and I got some heroin, I got some cocaine, and I had some alcohol. I got a fancy little rent-a-car, and I'm big pimping for a minute.
Yeah.
And so I got a room. I go out, and the reason that, and one reason that you can know that my program wasn't very solid, whatever 12-step program I was working, is because I still had reservations. What are reservations? Phone numbers in my case. And so when I
Just
got
in
that
case.
big check, I didn't have to think very long about where am I going to go cop some dope or what am I going to do. I just call it I still had all these old numbers in there. If I was really trying to stay clean, I would have erased that long ago. But no. So I called an old friend, found myself up on Aurora at a motel smoking crack. And pretty soon, you get hyper on crack. And I wanted to get a little something to take the edge off. So we went across the street and got some heroin. And somewhere along the way, I got some alcohol. And now I'm kind of hyper. And I don't like this scene of all these people coming and going at the room. So I said, I'm getting out of here. And I went up and got a room all by myself where I could isolate and just be piggy with it. And I got up to the Comfort Inn and further up on Aurora. Anyways, somewhere during the night, remember I have been clean for 3 years up until this point, I decided to do a muscle hit. I'm invincible in my mind, so a muscle hit never hurt me. And so I had been smoking crack all night. I did this heroin. I had it all pre-made earlier. I did a muscle hit, and the next morning the maids found me under the sink. The alcohol, the cocaine created a stroke. I'm pretty sure this hand doesn't work the same anymore as a result of the stroke. And I had kidney failure. I was on dialysis 3 times. And then it took a whole lot of occupational therapy, physical therapy, and the beginning cognitive therapy. When they took me to the hospital, I was taking DOA. I couldn't talk or swallow. And I was intubated and stayed that way for a long time. Then eventually They sent me from Northwest Hospital to University Hospital, and they have a gym on the 8th floor with a really awesome team of physical therapists, occupational therapists, and so on. And they, maybe God, maybe the staff of the hospitals, whatever, but definitely the staff from there helped me get the mobility that I am blessed with today. And
that was a little over 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I went to physical therapy, occupational therapy for long after I got out of the hospital, a year and a half or so. They had me doing things like picking up buttons and putting them in a soup can. This hand still doesn't have the ability to like pluck a dime up like you would, or whatever. It doesn't connect with the brain as a result of the stroke like it used to. So I get a daily reminder that substance doesn't really work for me anymore.
You sure gave it one heck of a good college try, though, didn't you?
I gave it all I had.
So
24 hours a day, 8 days a week, 366 days a year. I gave it all I had. I was devoted.
Yeah. So in your perspective, I can tell you what my perspective is on the return that relationship gave you, but what's your perspective?
Toe up and the flow up, beat up and the feet up, needing to check up in the neck. Things got better when I got clean and gave my body and brain a little time to heal. After the overdose, things got better. I don't know. My ability to prioritize, organize, make decisions that were designed for success or healthy living then, and they're not always perfect, but a whole lot better, and at least they're not destructive, I think, for the most part. And part of that was my old sponsor, Cherokee, telling me his anthem was get over yourself and find a way to reach out and help somebody else. So the work I got ever since that time I got involved in this social services work, there is something about that. If there is a God, I find it in one-on-one with the people we work with and seeing the changes that can happen, although not often enough.
Yeah. So, so now you are abstinence-based in your own life. Is that correct? You don't use any substance?
No, except for nicotine, and I'm working on that.
Well,
and coffee.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate that, and you've been doing that for, like you said, over 10 years.
And the odd thing is, what amazes me about the whole thing is that I never did not think about using again for all those decades, and it just doesn't occur to me
to use today. Yeah.
And part of that I credit to the job I do on the detox van.
Yeah.
And that I credit to Cherokee, the old sponsor I had, because he didn't always tell me the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But he showed me.
Yeah.
And in fact, when my own daughter was using substance and I was worried about her.
Yeah.
We developed a relationship over time, a pretty good one.
Yeah.
And my son. But that was his advice to me. I said, Cherokee, how can I convey to her where this lifestyle she was identifying with this hip-hop, gangbang, smoking, joking scene for a while. And I said, how can I convey to her where this is going to end up? He said, you didn't listen. Why would she? He said, show her, don't tell her.
Yeah. So, and I really love that. And I remember Cherokee. So when your kid started to use substances, how'd you feel about that? Obviously, you said you wanted to not do it. So you didn't value your lifestyle for all those years.
And I felt like I had recreated the same thing I would never want to do to a child what I felt like had been done to me, because I was the poor victim for a long time because of the drunken stepfather and all that.
Yeah.
I found myself feeling like I was doing that, repeating it. And that bothered me a lot.
Yeah.
And so how did I feel? I didn't like it. And I felt like I felt guilty because I felt like I had begun to do that. But what I didn't know is that she had a heart, and Madisons are those kind of folks. I mean, we just, she's a fighter. Says she's done really well. She's bounced back. She works in a bar, but she's a real good parent to two little kids, and my son is even I shouldn't say more awesome. They're both equally awesome in different ways.
Yeah. Well, I like that, and I appreciate that you were able to recognize that you didn't want your kid to go through the things that you couldn't stop doing
I did
yourself.
that a long time ago, but I didn't see it.
Right.
See, I didn't see a lot of things because of my perceptions were a big part of my problem. My attitudes
Feel
and perceptions.
like you were kind of siloed into your life
Yeah, I wanted to be William S. Burroughs, Axl Rose, and Al Capone all rolled
all at the
into
same
one.
time. So let's talk a little bit about the work that you do. So you work in social services and you work on a van. Talk to me about what you do today.
What I do on the van?
Yep.
Okay, so Emergency Services Patrol is...